Hi, everybody. This is Juli D'Ascendis back with you again for our Ministry Network video series called Listen Up, Church Finances. And today I'm joined again by our risk leadership and insurance guru, rwise, and he's here from Emery & Webb. And today he's going to talk to us about employment practice liability insurance. That's kind of a mouthful, but this is really an important element of risk leadership within the church. And Rob is here again to explain it to us and to give us some details about what we need to do to make sure that we have this important coverage in place. So Rob, take it away. Tell us what is employment practice liability?
It is a mouthful.
It is.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
And it's a scary mouthful.
It is. There's a lot. If you live in New Jersey, it's real. Employment practices liability came about as a coverage relatively recent, last 30 years,
right.
Because of a gap. As employment law grew, so did all the litigation surrounding employment law. And typical insurance policies did not cover this at all.
Right.
So employment practices begin to grow. And what it is as a employee, if I feel like I've been discriminated against, harassed, treated unfairly in some way, again, if I feel, doesn't necessarily mean it happened, but if I feel that way, I can bring a suit against the employer. Additionally, I also get the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission involved, the EEOC.
That's a government agency.
That's a government agency,
okay.
And the file first goes to them. If they deem it to be appropriate and discrimination may have occurred, they join the suit. So not only are you facing an individual, you're facing the government as an employer, which makes it incredibly difficult to navigate at times and expensive at times because of the defense.
Right. So can I just ask you a question,
sure.
Rob? Sorry to interrupt, but as you were speaking, I was thinking about the whole idea of, aren't Christians like not supposed to be suing each other? So if I work in a church, and I'm making an assumption here, I work for you in your church, and I'm a believer and you're a believer, I'm going to sue you?
Yes.
So this happens, right?
Yes,
it is actually happening. So I mean,
yes.
I'm not trying to make light of it, but honestly, the truth is, and for those of you that are not aware of this, the truth is that there is no longer the artificial protection of, well, my employees are all believers, so I don't have to worry about this. So I just want to make that point that those days are gone. And
yes.
it's unfortunate on a lot of levels, but those days are gone. So it is very reasonable to expect that you could get sued by an employee who's also a believer.
Absolutely,
so I'm just going to put that out there. Yeah,
to give you some scope and scale, there's over 550 EPL claims being filed every day. 30% of all litigation in the system, in the legal system, is employment-related suits.
Wow.
I mean, it is massive, and of course, it has come over to churches
It is
as well.
in the church.
It is in church
absolutely.
as well.
Wow.
So, where you're going to see this coverage is it's typically connected to your directors and officers liability policy.
Okay.
So you can buy it standalone, you can buy it combined with, that's where you're going to see it. But it is there to address wrongful acts, that's what it's called, in the and that would be discrimination, harassment issues that come out of an employment relationship.
Okay.
However, there is one other part of this. Churches, as you know, operate in a huge capacity on volunteer labor.
Unpaid
volunteer labor. With employment practices that is treating or working with a nonprofit, they change the definition to include volunteers.
Oh, okay.
So volunteers that would bring suit, and that does happen as well.
Right, sure.
And so it's broadened for that purpose.
Okay.
There's also another coverage part this is where most pastors or leaders sit up when I say this next part. Third-party liability. It means nothing in and of itself until you say this. What happens when someone comes to the church, in a Assembly of God church, same-sex couple, let's say a same-sex couple, I come to you, I said, I want to use your facility for my wedding. You say, I'm sorry, you're welcome at our church, but we do not do that based on this, this, and this. Well, now I've been discriminated against. I'm not an employee, I'm not a volunteer, what am I? I'm a third party coming against the church. That is the discrimination that this policy can also cover. And that is a big deal. because as religious groups, we do have codes, we do have ideas that may feel discriminatory towards other groups, but yet it is within our rights to maintain that.
Right.
So that's the important part of this coverage and how it relates to churches. It's got a funny name, but it means a lot to the church.
And that's important, and I hope you guys are sitting up and taking notice of that, because we know, certainly in New Jersey, that this has been challenged time after time after time. So it's important to know that there is help out there for that circumstance.
Yes, there is coverage that can respond for sure.
Good.
So the other part that typically comes up, even if I give that example, would be, well, aren't churches exempt? I'm a religious institution. Aren't I exempt from some of these laws? But as an employer, in 90% of the time, you're not exempt.
Churches are employers.
Churches are employers.
And if you have volunteers, you should provide coverage for them. Even if you don't have, maybe but one or two employees, you're using volunteers, and you might need this coverage if something happens with them.
Even for that.
Right.
Yeah, so it applies on both sides. If you do have a large staff or larger staff, you do have to abide by the laws of New Jersey and the laws of the United States as an employer in that. So some of the the laws that are typically touched on this would be the Civil Rights Acts. The big one recently would be Fair Labor Standard Act, and what that is wage and hour issues. So just today we were in Juli's office. And we got a call from a church asking this very question, and that's the big one: is do I have to pay overtime? What do I do in these cases? And it's a law. Yes, you do have to pay overtime. You do have to go through these things. And this is coming up more and more because in church, it's a gray area.
It is.
When am I Rob Wise, the bookkeeper, and Rob Wise, the Sunday school teacher?
Right,
and I had to go, it can gray over. So those issues are coming up within the church as well. So that's a law that comes into play a lot. Another one that would come up with the American Disabilities Act. We see this with churches where someone can come to the church and say, I feel discriminated against because there's no ramp for me to get into the building. Now, in some cases, they might not be looking for you to pay them money. They might just say,
they want the accommodation, right, exactly.
And that's injunctive relief. They're looking for some way to do that. So this can take a lot of forms, but it is touching real laws, and these are things that churches do have to comply with in many cases.
Right. Wow. And also, I think one of the most recent things that's happened, at least this is what I heard, and I think we actually read something that you gave us, dealing with employees that might have mental health issues. That's something that can also fall under the realm of discrimination and that sort of thing, right?
Absolutely, the ability, because things being deemed a disability, the employer is required to accommodate to the best of their ability in those cases. So whether it's severe depression or those types of things that can be quite difficult, the employer still does have an obligation to try to accommodate in some cases. So yes.
Yeah. So why don't you just explain to us briefly what is considered a reason for someone to sue under this Employment Act? Like, what is considered a wrongful termination
Employment Act,
or something?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the list is quite long of what can be a wrongful act. But think of, you've got your laws; those are going to trigger things. You have things like discrimination, retaliation, failure to promote.
Right.
Wrongful termination and how it was handled. All of those things within the sphere of the relationship as it goes on day to day, year to year. The big one these days, of course, sexual harassment. The Me Too movement, sexual harassment falls under this. The state of New York just passed a law on this that every employee must be trained in sexual harassment. I'm going to guess that's going to trickle out to other states very soon. So that part falls within this coverage as well, and that means you having to define what it is, how the employer reacts to it and responds to it and disciplines for it, all those types of ideas. So the wrongful act definition, going back to insurance, you want it as broad as possible. So when you're looking through your policy, you want it to catch as much as it can in that realm of what a wrongful act could be.
Right. And so in addition to insurance coverage, what can churches do to help and to participate in preventing these things maybe from happening?
That is probably a episode in itself, or
Yeah,
an event in
right.
itself, and we're going to tackle that.
Right.
But at a very high level, it is about communication and documentation.
The two things we love the most, right?
Yes, that we're really good at too.
Documentation. Oh no.
Yeah. It's fill those files.
Yes.
But if we could boil it down, a lot of it revolves around a church utilizing a handbook, utilizing regular reviews, and documenting files.
Right.
Keeping the communication between what I expect as an employee is happening is what you believe is happening as the employer.
Right.
And that is a very clear communication that way.
Right.
So there's a lot more than those three things I mentioned, but that's a great starting
Right.
point.
Well, and we also need to get ourselves educated. So it's
Yes.
our responsibility to understand, what does harassment mean? Like what kind of things can I do and say in the workplace, and what kind of things do I need to avoid? Part of it is, as pastors and as church leaders, oftentimes we just don't know can I say that? Can I do that? Is that okay? We don't even ask the question. So we really do need, I think, to get educated.
Yes,
So,
it's
great.
an important concept.
It is.
It's going to remain and grow, and we do want churches to be aware of it and what you can do, not to feel defenseless about it, but churches are safe places. Churches are wonderful places, and we really can lead the charge in this area.
I agree. We could set the example. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Rob, for being here and giving us an overview of employment practices. We're actually going to continue this in another video where Rob is going to take a deeper dive into some of the more detailed aspects of employment liability. So thanks again for giving us a listen, and we hope we'll see you as we continue this important series. Thanks, and God bless.